Hello and welcome. Since October 7 that the Hamas attacked Israel and killed over 1,400 people, I have not seen any video or any news channel or any TV station or any radio station or protest or individuals, YouTube channel, Facebook, articles, comment anywhere that is non-biased as this video. Watch this video till the end and leave your comment.
Sometimes in this journalism business, it is hard to get the words exactly right, particularly in a situation that is complex and layered, which evokes so much deep emotion and conflict, and where people's lives are literally at stake. And given how brittle the feelings are, to the point where many Americans are afraid to say anything at all, we should be able to agree on a few fundamentals. First, that it is wrong to kill children. Whether they are Israeli children or Palestinian children, it is wrong to kill kids in a concert field or in a kibbutz or in a hospital. In fact, it is morally repugnant. If we can't agree on that, then we can't be friends. We should also agree that anti-Semitism is wrong, full stop, period. And it should horrify everyone that we're seeing attacks against Jewish people here and abroad, like the online messages threatening violence against Jewish students at Cornell University, or the anti-Semitic mob that stormed an airport tarmac in Russia, apparently searching for Jewish passengers on a flight from Israel, or the Heil Hitler message projected on an interstate overpass in Georgia. None of this is okay, needless to say. And no matter how you feel about the government in Israel and what that government does, that is not an excuse to take out your anger on individual Jewish people, whether they're Americans or Israelis or British or random passengers on a plane. Keep in mind, some of your strongest allies in your outrage on behalf of Palestinians are Jewish. They are protesting beside you and getting arrested with you at those protests. And many of them are walking around in shock and horror and fear right now because of October 7th, worrying about their families and wondering who their friends are. Likewise, you can't judge every Palestinian or every Muslim or every Arab based on what Hamas did any more than you could have judged every American by the fact that some Americans elected a religious extremist backed wannabe autocrat, and now multiple indicted criminal whose MAGA movement tried to violently overthrow the government and still might. And again, it should be needless to say, being for Palestinians' freedom and staying alive does not mean you love Hamas or support them. The Hamas attack killed an estimated 1,400 people, including children, according to Israeli authorities. And as of tonight, the death toll in Gaza has topped 8,000 since October 7th, including 3,400 children, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. President Biden may say he doesn't believe Palestinians when they say how many of them have been killed. But reporting by news organizations like the AP, Reuters, the BBC, and our own reporters on the ground make it clear that the numbers of dead and the devastation in Gaza are staggering. The internet and some electricity have been turned back on, at least for now. And journalists and people in Gaza are still getting pictures out so we can see with our own eyes that the situation is dire and the violence goes beyond bombs. The U.S. is warning Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to rein in extremist settlers in the occupied West Bank in the wake of reports of violence against Palestinians there. According to the Associated Press, a Jewish settler shot and killed a Palestinian man who was harvesting olives near the West Bank city of Nablus. This means at least 7 Palestinians have been killed by settlers since the latest violence broke out more than 3 weeks ago. With that as a backdrop, Netanyahu gave a war speech over the weekend that can only be described as a religious call to arms, citing a biblical reference when saying, quote, "You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our holy Bible," unquote. Now, for those not familiar with the biblical term Amalek, here is the relevant quotation from 1 Samuel 15:3. "Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys," which does not sound like self-defense. Frankly, it sounds a lot more like a call for genocide. Israeli jets have bombarded not just northern Gaza, but southern Gaza too, despite Israeli officials calling on the 2 million displaced Palestinians to flee south. And given these bombings are being done using our tax dollars, perhaps we should ask some questions. For example, how does bombing a densely populated land strip filled 50% with children constitute self-defense? How does bombing hospitals, churches, mosques, and UN schools constitute self-defense? Well, you say if Hamas fighters are hiding in the hospital using the civilians as human shields, okay, let's say they are. Are you arguing that flattening the hospital and killing newborns in their incubators and their moms in the NICU, cancer patients, someone with a broken leg, the doctors, nurses, and just the women and kids hiding in the hospital, that's not a war crime? Because you would be wrong, according to international law. Well, why don't the people in Gaza just turn over Hamas militants to the Israelis? Okay, how do you propose they do that? Hamas is the de facto government in Gaza, and they're the ones with the guns. The leaders of Hamas aren't even in Gaza. And if they were, if you were a teenager living in an open-air prison, getting bombed day and night by, let's say, Mexico, and Mexican police kicked in the door and raided your house anytime they wanted and turned off the water and cut off your food, what are you going to do? Side with them? Help them while you're dying? That's like asking why black folks don't help or trust the police. Okay, but after 9/11, we bombed Afghanistan in self-defense? Yeah, we did. And did that put an end to al-Qaeda or get bin Laden? No, it did not. Because like Hamas, bin Laden wasn't in the country we were bombing. President Obama got him 10 years later in Pakistan using special forces and without bombing scores of kids to death. Bombing Afghanistan did buy us a 20-year occupation that got us more enemies in the Muslim world when we scooped people up on the battlefield and dragged them off to Gitmo. And when we threw in a gratuitous war against Iraq based on lies by a Bush administration that traded on our anger and our fear, the world rose up against us as we committed torture and tossed former Iraqi police and soldiers into makeshift gulags, and those prisoners later turned into ISIS. Oh, and the Taliban are back in control of Afghanistan. So again, what is the goal of mass bombing Gaza? Is it to find the people Hamas militants abducted on October 7? Okay, how? By flattening whatever shelter they're taking from the bombs? Don't you risk killing them all by bombing them with the Palestinians? Just some relevant questions. And trust me, people do want answers. Over the weekend, protests erupted around the world with hundreds of thousands of demonstrators rallying in cities in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Copenhagen, Rome, Stockholm, Kuala Lumpur. Scores took to the streets in the U.S., shutting down the Brooklyn Bridge in New York and a major highway in San Francisco. The call in each of these protests was for a ceasefire, a word that for some has somehow come to mean anti-Semitism and a lack of care about those who were brutally killed on October 7th, or even support for Hamas. So how then do you explain the family members of some of those being held by Hamas who are also calling for a ceasefire? And what would a ceasefire even mean? Well, it would literally mean both sides stop shooting. No more rockets into Israel, no more Israeli jets strafing Gaza. It would mean a prisoner swap negotiated by credible third parties, which sadly probably doesn't include us at this point. It would mean getting food, water, and medicine into Gaza and not pushing for 2 million Palestinians to expel themselves to Egypt or Jordan, likely to never be allowed to return. Hopefully, it would mean tamping down the McCarthyism and the doxing and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism in our own country and in Europe. And then somebody, anybody, actually working to solve the real problem, which is a 56-year occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip that has sparked and will continue to spark vehement and, yes, even violent resistance, whether Hamas exists or not. It's a lot to unpack. And sometimes it feels like an impossible conversation. But we need to have it anyway, today, tomorrow, and in the many days ahead. Today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said a ceasefire will not happen in his latest speech, pointed at an international audience. What that means for the region, the U.S., and the world is next.